on several consumer protection issues. Eric, we're very excited to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. I haven't used Teams a lot, so forgive me if I screw this up somehow, but I think it's going to be all right. I have the chat box open, so if anybody has questions as we go along, feel free to throw those in there, and I'll do my best to just answer them on the recording. And if you'd like to, also feel free to throw your name in there and what you do for your day job, because that helps me to know how you might be in a position to come into contact with the address confidentiality program or somebody who's using it. So that's really helpful to me, whether you're an advocate or law enforcement, or you work for the state in some capacity, or your local community government somehow. That's really helpful for me to know. So like Jamie said, the address confidentiality program provides, hold on, let me share my screen here. That'd be helpful for you all. Okay, can everybody see that?
Not yet. There we go. It's up and running, and I'm going to mute myself.
Beautiful. Okay, I lost my chat function somehow. So if anybody has a question, just unmute yourself and break in. Feel free to interrupt me. That won't hurt my feelings. So the address confidentiality program, like Jamie said, provides a service to eligible victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking. And the whole purpose of this program is to provide them with an extra piece of safety by keeping their home address or their residential address confidential. And the way we do that is we issue a substitute address that uses a P.O. box that we here at the Office of Victim Services manage, as well as our street address for our office. We issue them that address along with a unique identifier, a personal mailbox number, so that they can use that address when they interact with people out in the world. And primarily, the program is designed so that they can use that address when they interact with state and local government, because there's a statute in place that mandates that government agencies accept the substitute address. But by and large, we find that pretty much any time an address is required or requested, whoever the requester is willing to use that substitute address. The whole goal of the program is to just keep someone's address out of any public records and off the internet. The only people at the end of the day who should know where this survivor is living is the survivor, their family members living with them, and us here at the address confidentiality program. That's the safest way for them to be. Everybody else shouldn't know where they reside physically. Like Jamie also said, the program provides free first-class mail forwarding, because what good is having an address to use if you can't get mail there, right? Because we all get our bank statements every month and our insurance statements, and people send us Christmas cards and things like that. So without having the mail piece of it, the program is not as useful for the survivors as it could be. I also have up there just a fun fact that this was created in 2005, implemented in 2006. So this is not a new thing. And it always surprises me when I talk to groups about this program, because by and large, most people across the state of Montana have never heard of it. They've never interacted with anybody who uses it. They don't know what the program is. And unfortunately, sometimes they're even kind of suspicious about it. So this is not a new thing. It's time for us to get the word out there. It's time for us as service providers and law enforcement and government employees to know what this is, so that we can use it properly to serve survivors of violence. The best candidates for this program are folks who either have recently moved to a new location or plan to move. That's not a requirement for enrollment in the program, and I will enroll any survivor who feels like this program will benefit them. But realistically, if there's not a new address to protect from an abuser or a stalker or a potential abuser, then it's not particularly useful. You know, if you've been living in the same house for the past 5 years and your abuser knows where that is, enrolling in this program will only cause a delay in your mail. That's the reality of it. Even if you just move back to your mom's house, or you move across town, or you're staying with a friend, or you go someplace where the abuser or the stalker can pretty easily track you, that's not particularly helpful as far as your enrollment in the program, because that kind of makes it a moot point, right? So a new address that hasn't been used for lots of things, that's not on your driver's license, that hasn't been used to register to vote, that, you know, hasn't been used to sign up for all sorts of things where that data will end up on the internet. It's that point in time where you've got that new address, or you're going to soon within the next few months. That's where we want to encourage these survivors to look into the address confidentiality program, because once they have that new address, we can help them protect it. The requirements for enrolling in the ACP are simple. You have to be a Montana resident and be able to prove that. You have to provide some sort of proof of eligibility as far as the victimization that took place. And I, thankfully, as the administrator, have a lot of discretion as far as what I can accept for that. So oftentimes I'll accept protection orders or law enforcement reports about a particular incident, folks who are receiving services from advocates or from mental health care providers or someone like that. If that service provider can provide me with a statement saying, yes, we've served this person in the capacity of a DV survivor or whatever the case may be, that's plenty for me. I also accept letters often from lawyers who are helping the person to get a protection order or to get a dissolution of marriage or with the parenting plan, that can say, you know, this person needs our help. This person needs your help because of this particular victimization, and that's plenty for me. And then just the short paperwork is a quick application and a checklist that lets the potential applicant know what the program guidelines are and lets them know what they're getting into. So that's the ease of it. We try to make it as least burdensome as possible because we know that these survivors have a lot going on. There's a lot of moving pieces that are happening as they're trying to move from disorder into some sort of sustainable, orderly life where they can be what they need to be for themselves and their kids. So making it simple is the premier thing that's on my mind when I'm interacting with these applicants is how can we get you enrolled in this as easily and as quickly as possible. It's really important to remember that the address confidentiality program is simply a component of a safety plan. This is not a silver bullet. It won't solve all the problems that a survivor is dealing with. It won't keep them safe on its own. It is a component of a safety plan. There are other steps that most survivors will need to take. And every time I talk to a potential applicant or answer questions about the program, I'm always encouraging that person to get in touch with their local advocate to talk about what are the things they should be doing to keep themselves and their kids safe. I'm going to take a quick break. Does anybody have any questions or comments at this point? Feel free to throw them out there.
So, Eric, this is Jamie. With any type of conviction, being able to provide that court paperwork would meet your proof of eligibility requirement?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. The statute there are multiple statutes that govern the administration of this program, and I have a lot of issues with them. But the one that I really like is that it provides me with a lot of discretion as far as who I can enroll in the program and for how long. So I choose to believe if someone tells me that this program will help them because they've suffered some sort of victimization, I choose to believe. If they feel like this is a necessary component for them to stay safe in the future, I will work with them to get them enrolled using whatever they have. And, you know, I'm well aware of the fact that a lot of victims, a lot of survivors don't have anything official, right? Because we know that a lot of victims don't report, they don't seek services. So a lot of the potential applicants, they don't have a protection order. They've never reported to law enforcement. They've never sought services from an advocate. So it becomes, what do you have? You know, do you have friends or family who have witnessed some sort of violence or who you've confided in about the things that have been going on? Would they be willing to write me a letter and sign it saying, I know about this and I feel like it would help my friend or my family member to stay safe in the future? If that's the case, I'll take it and we'll go from there. I really do my best to meet them where they're at because I know that's absolutely necessary to help them stay safe.
Awesome. Thank you.
Of course. So why is this so valuable? I mean, I think probably most of the folks on the call can already see why that is, but often I talk with groups who don't have any particular training in the dynamics of domestic violence or sexual assaults. They don't have any particular training in trauma or victim behavior, so they don't necessarily grasp this at first. The fact of the matter is that most records in Montana that are generated when a person interacts with some sort of government agency become accessible to the public. That's marriage licenses at the local courthouse, it's property records at the treasurer's office, it's voter registration rolls for a small fee. Court records can be requested, law enforcement reports can be requested, arrest records are generally publicly accessible, and so are vital records like the births and deaths of a child or a spouse or something like that. And we probably know that using any of this information, a stalker or an abuser or a potential abuser can go through these things and narrow down a location to where a survivor might be living. If not street address, well, then maybe county or maybe town. And even that is too close for comfort for most survivors, right? So using this substitute address that we issue to them when they enroll in the program, when they go out and they accomplish all these tasks, they can use that substitute address. And that's where it's not an entire safety plan in and of itself, because yes, it is still a Montana address. Yes, it is still a Helena address. It's not everything that a person needs to fall off the grid, but it's a layer of protection that can keep the street address where they're living safe so that a stalker or an abuser doesn't show up on their doorstep. Or for that matter, somebody sent by a stalker or an abuser to intimidate or to menace. We see that a lot too, right? A family member or a friend sending threatening messages or something like that. I've seen that in cases where the abuser has been incarcerated. They'll send a friend or they'll send a family member or something like that. Anything to keep the street address, the home address of the survivor and their family members off the record, that's what we want to do.
Eric?
Go ahead.
Does this apply with our human trafficking victims as well, as we're attempting to keep their location secret until court?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Like I kind of mentioned, the statutes are weak in some ways, and the statute governing who can enroll in the program does not specifically mention human trafficking survivors. But I am happy to enroll a trafficking survivor. I just fairly recently enrolled the first survivor that listed her primary complaint as trafficking. I don't see any reason why this program can't and shouldn't be used by trafficking survivors. And as go on, there are things that I want to change about the statute, and that is top of my list, is to include trafficking survivors as well as survivors of strangulation. Those are the two things that I think are really, really missing as far as named survivors who should enroll in the program. So there's a two-part answer. No, right now it doesn't cover trafficking survivors, but yes, I will enroll those folks in the program because I have the discretion to do so, and I believe it's necessary. So this is the Address Confidentiality Program authorization card. I hope you can all see that well enough to get an idea of what it looks like. This is what enrolled participants are issued when they get accepted into the program. And you'll see there on the front that we list the person's name, we list their personal mailbox number, and then the substitute address is right there. The substitute address is the same for everyone who enrolls in the program, and the difference between each individual person, or each individual household, I should say, is that personal mailbox number. That's how we know whose mail is coming in and who to send it to. That's how we keep people differentiated from one another, because sometimes there are similar names, We sometimes allow people to use alias names to receive mail, so that gets a little bit confusing and hard to track. So that personal mailbox number is absolutely key for us to make sure that the right mail is going to the right person, and that whoever's calling us to ask questions about the person sitting in front of them, we can talk to them about the right person in their particular situation. On the bottom of the card there also is the valid dates. Folks are enrolled in the program for 4-year terms. So if I enrolled them today, that would be October 6, 2020, and they would need to renew in their enrollment before October 6th of 2024. The statute tells me that I can enroll or renew a person's enrollment if they continue to fear for their safety, and that happens a lot. It's about 50-50. A lot of the participants in the program tend to be relatively transient. They tend to be kind of on the run, and they'll stay in Montana for a relatively short time, which is fine. If that's how they feel they need to protect themselves, I totally support it. So in that case, their participation gets discontinued. Most of the time, I'm able to set them up in another state with a similar program. But for some people, they move to Montana, they enroll in this program, they find that it really works well for them, they build a lifestyle around it, and then they stay enrolled forever because it helps them organize their life. It gives them a reliable address to use. And once they get everything set up with this address, there's less work for them to have to do because this address doesn't change, right? Regardless of how many houses, this address stays the same. And they don't have to update their address in government records or anything like that. So we have some people who have been enrolled from the absolute beginning, and that's totally fine. They continue to fear for their safety, which means that every 4 years I will absolutely renew them. When these cards are issued to participants, they're told that they should carry it on them. They're told that they should be prepared to show it to whoever they're interacting with, and they should be prepared to let someone take a photocopy of it. The fact that they're enrolled in the program is not confidential information. If somebody calls me and says, hey, is this person enrolled? I'm bound to say, yes, they are. I don't have to give them any other information, but I do have to acknowledge that they're enrolled. So they should be willing and able to show this card anytime it's requested. And especially with the situation we're in, where most people don't know anything about this program, they're a little suspect at the beginning when the person whips out this card and says, I'm in this program, I need you to accept this address. It's not my address, but I need you to use it. Most people will want to see this card, and they'll want to pull a CYA move by taking a photocopy of this card, and that's fine. The other key thing about this card is that the phone number for the program is on the back. I tell participants every time I send one of these cards, the phone number is on the back. If you have a question, call it. If you're interacting with somebody who has a question, tell them to call it. Put me on the phone with somebody. If you're sitting in front of somebody who's giving you a hard time or who doesn't understand or who's not taking it seriously, get them on the phone. We'll work it out, that type of thing. Questions about the card? Okay. We had a video. It's really good video. We can't get the sound to work, so we're going to skip through the video. That means that you'll have to listen to me talk more, so sorry about that. But it's out of my hands at this point. So private businesses are a sticky part of this program. Private businesses are not required by law to accept the substitute address the way that government agencies are. But what I've found is that most businesses are willing to use the substitute address if they understand why it's important to the customer, and if they're able to find a way within their own structure or their own system to use the substitute address. So most transactions don't require a home address. If you think about things like personal banking or auto insurance, cell phone plans or credit cards or healthcare billing, none of that really needs a home address. There's no reason for any of those businesses to really know where the person lives. What's important for them is to be able to correspond with the person, to get them their statements, to get them their bills, to make sure that they have someplace to, to give to the collections company if they go to collections, It's all about money for them, and it's all about correspondence for them. They're not going to show up on anybody's doorstep, so they don't need a home address. They just need a good mailing address. What I tell businesses And what I tell participants is that the bottom line is that if it doesn't hurt the company to accept a substitute address, why wouldn't they? Right? It's helping their customers to stay safe. That's increasing customer satisfaction, which every business wants to do. And there's no downside to it for them. They're not losing money. They're not losing the ability to correspond with their customer. They're getting everything they need. And what they can do to help their customer get what they need is to accept the substitute address. And most of the time, once we help them to understand that it's a matter of safety for the customer and for the family members living with the customer, most private business people have no issue with it whatsoever. Kind of the same thing goes for federal agencies. The federal government is not required to use the substitute address that Montana ACP provides because it's a state program. There's no federal equivalent of the address confidentiality program. The federal government does not have one. And that's an issue that every state with this type of program deals with, because 9 out of 10 survivors is not only looking for help from state government, but also from federal government, and sometimes federal government programs do need a residential address. But other times, like private businesses, if whatever transaction they're working on doesn't require a home address, then why shouldn't they accept the substitute address? And that's kind of how I pitch it to them. Most service providers at the federal government level want to help survivors, and most of the time they don't need a home address. They don't often recognize that because they're taught to ask for a home address, and they're fairly stubborn as far as trying to make sure that they have what they need to do their job, and rightfully so, but they don't often need it. And so it's, again, one of those situations where if I can get on the phone with somebody, I can often explain to them, what do you need the address for, and why is this substitute address not good enough? And most of the time, they'll come to the realization that it most often is. So when we're talking about federal agencies, we're talking oftentimes about the U.S. Attorney's offices, district court issues that survivors are dealing with. If they're dealing with some sort of interstate law enforcement issue, there might be an FBI thing open, or BIA sometimes. They're often receiving services from FBI or BIA victim witness programs. Sometimes they're interacting with the Bureau of Prisons if their abuser is incarcerated. But we're also talking about the Postal Service and things as crucial to their survival as the Social Security Administration, and things like that. So when should an enrolled participant use the substitute address? I think you've gathered it by now. The point is they should use it all the time. They should never hesitate to try to use it. Most survivors that I interact with who are interested in the program or who are enrolled in the program are needing public benefits. They're often needing SNAP and TANF and Medicaid. A lot of them are interacting with the Child Support Enforcement Division. Most of them drive, so they need a driver's license or at least a state ID. That means that they need an address to put on their driver's license. They need to register their car and make sure that it's appropriately titled. They need insurance, whether that's auto insurance or health insurance or life insurance. They need a checking account and a savings account, and sometimes more personal banking services to be able to be financially stable. Some participants, unfortunately, have to interact with law enforcement. Often there are not criminal things that are happening, but a car accident, a fender bender, a speeding ticket, a parking ticket, something like that. And then everybody has the right to vote, should have the right to vote. And a lot of the participants are interacting with the courts in some way, whether that's getting a protection order for the first time or following up on a protection order or working through a dissolution of marriage or a parenting plan. Oftentimes those court services are in other states, which is a tricky issue. But at the end of the day, they should be using this substitute address everywhere they go with everyone they interact with. They should never hesitate to at least try. Does anybody have anything that they want to chat about as far as a situation where they can think of the substitute address coming in handy, or where it wouldn't be accepted, or where you're not sure about whether it would be accepted or might be an issue for the survivor?
I have a question as a survivor.
Okay.
So like I know when I call 911, even if I can't talk, they have my address, they're going to come find me, they're going to, you know, I've
Yeah,
been in situations before where I haven't been able to speak, but they know where I'm at.
absolutely.
So by using this address, would it make it so some of those services, you know, like would that change if I call 911 and they try to look me up? Would my address not be there? Like what at what level would they still be able to know where, like that's kind of
Right. So
sorry.
yeah, so that's a super tricky question. Thank you for bringing it up. Law enforcement, honestly, is the trickiest piece of this whole program because it's so complex. There's so many moving pieces, and every single interaction with law enforcement is different for every single person, right? Um, so the reason that law enforcement knows where you're calling from, regardless of whether you tell them where you're calling from, is because of your phone service provider. Most people are using their cell phones, and that signal is triangulated using cell phone towers. Some people, if they're using a home phone, that phone number goes right to 911. So it starts with what address your phone service provider has on file for you. If they have your residential address, that will be provided to 911 when you call 911. If they have the legal substitute address, I would hope and pray that that would be communicated to law enforcement, even though there might be an argument to be made for law enforcement needing to know where you are if you're at your home when you're calling 911, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first tricky piece is what information does your cell phone company have and what are they providing to 911 when you call 911? And if you're in a situation where you can't speak, that's particularly dangerous. It moves down the line a little bit to the actual interaction with law enforcement because once they show up at your home, they need to know where you are so that they can show up and try to provide services to you. But B, once they show up there, your cover is kind of blown, right? If you're in this program and you're trying to keep your residence secure and you try to keep your home address confidential, once law enforcement shows up there, that's out the door a little bit because we can't entirely control law enforcement, and there will always be law enforcement records as far as they're responding. There will be call records, there will be dispatch records, and there might be a report written by a law enforcement officer depending on the situation. So then it becomes a conversation with law enforcement as far as their report making as to how to protect this home address even though you've already been there. And so I haven't gotten the chance to talk with law enforcement a lot about this. And the issue is that every law enforcement department is a little bit different in the way that they keep records and the systems that they use. But what it comes down to is that every law enforcement department should recognize this program, should recognize that they are mandated by statute to accept the legal substitute address as your legal substitute address. And it is up to them to make sure that your home address, even if they have been there, doesn't become matter of public record if they respond there to a 911 call or for any reason. So it becomes partially their responsibility to make sure that their reports are written correctly and filed in the correct place so that if somebody files a request to receive that report, that they don't receive a report that has your home address in it. And it unfortunately becomes your responsibility to some extent to follow up with law enforcement and make sure that that's being taken seriously, right? Every law enforcement department has a records department, and it's the records department that can tell you what's in the report that was written about your interaction with law enforcement. And if you're enrolled in this program, if you can demonstrate your enrollment, you should be able to prove to the records department at whatever particular law enforcement agency that they need to go in and change that report to make sure that your home address is not anywhere that can be seen publicly. They can do that by marking it confidential. They can do that by replacing it with your legal substitute address. They can do that by filing it in a different way. there's a variety of measures that they can use to do it, but everyone's a little bit different. So I don't have one clean, clear answer for you as to what to do with a law enforcement interaction. And that's super unfortunate. Did I come even close to touching your question whatsoever?
Oh yeah, definitely. I guess for me, my biggest thing is like in those emergency moments, what happens? And that is interesting dynamic there.
Yep, that's the scary part. And what I tell people when they enroll in the program is that harsh truth is that if you're at your home and you have an issue and you call 911 and the police or the fire department need to show up, your address is going to be out there, and you need to be prepared for that eventuality, and you need to be prepared to then undertake whatever steps are necessary to try to reclaim that privacy. And I'm here to help with that, because law enforcement, go ahead.
My fear isn't the like it eventually getting out there, that aspect of it. It's can they get to me immediately if I need them.
Right.
Like the long term is, I can deal with that after the fact, but if my offender shows up on my doorstep, I can't talk.
Right.
Like that's the safety issue is, I'm safety oriented as a survivor. So that's the first thing that comes.
Yeah. And that piece is a technology piece that has to do with the phone that you're calling from.
Yeah.
Cell phones, regardless of the address that the cell phone is registered to, won't necessarily provide an absolutely accurate address. They'll provide an area. And that area could be 20 meters away from where your cell phone is. It could be 2 miles away from where your cell phone is, regardless of the address. And the way for law enforcement to get your address from the cell phone provider is to request it from the cell phone provider. And there's a process for that, but it takes time, right? And I know that because of my time as a police dispatcher, because we would do that a lot, is when people called us from a cell phone and we couldn't get a good location on where they were, we would get in touch with Verizon or AT&T or T-Mobile or whoever it was, and we'd say, what's the number that we fax our request to? And they would say, here's the number you fax your request to. And we'd have our officer in charge fill out a form. We'd fax the request to them. We'd wait 20 minutes to get the information back from them. And then we could send somebody to the registered address.
So by that point, someone would be dead. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's the scary truth of it. If you have a home phone and it's registered to where you actually live, then that will come up on 911. That will display on our 911 screen. So I know most people don't have a home phone, so it's a little bit useless to talk about. But an example is my dad has a heart condition. He's had heart attacks, right? And he's really scared of having another heart attack and having the ambulance not know where he is or how to get to him. So I told him, don't get rid of your home phone. Keep it next to you. And if you have a heart attack, call 911 from your home phone. And even if you can't talk, they will be able to have an address to send the ambulance to. So it's a scary technology piece that's not perfect. Law enforcement does the best they can to respond as quickly as they can, but it does take time. So I know that probably doesn't instill much confidence, and I'm sorry for that.
No, that's okay. That's why I asked, just to fill in some of those gaps.
I'm really hopeful about the new wave of technology that's coming to law enforcement with text 911 and that type of communication. That's not a really widespread thing. It's still a pilot project in most places, and I think honestly it'll be a long time coming to Montana. But they are experimenting with alternate ways that someone calling for help can communicate when they can't talk. And the way that they're looking at, I think, primarily is texting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody
else?
you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Taylor. That was an awesome question. Yes, Eric. Maria has a question for you.
Great.
She has her hand up. Maria, you're on.
Thank you. So related to that conversation, Eric, I have, cell phone service. My daughter who lives in Missoula and my daughter who lives in Seattle are under my cell phone program. So if they call 911 and I'm the owner of the service and I live in Billings, Montana, how would 911 find them in their locales?
So 911 would triangulate their cell phone location based on the closest towers. So did you say Missoula and Seattle?
Right.
So thankfully, Missoula and Seattle are both places where there are enough cell phone towers to provide a pretty decent accuracy rate as far as where the location of that cell phone might be. Again, it's not going to be this person is at such and such an address. It might be, 2 houses down. It might be a mile down the street. It depends on where your daughters are calling from in relation to cell phone towers. And so that's not ideal. I mean, it's better than it could be. It's certainly better than it would be maybe in some more rural places where there aren't 3 cell phone towers and there's only 1, right? Because in a place where there's 3 cell phone towers, they can triangulate and it works pretty well. In a place where there's 1 cell phone tower, it doesn't work that well because, it tells you what cell phone tower you're closest to. So if you're in the middle of those 3, that's helpful. If you're closest to a cell phone tower that's 100 miles from any other cell phone tower, not helpful, right? And then again, if the triangulation didn't help, they would have to contact your cell phone provider for an address, and it would be your address in Billings, Montana, and that also wouldn't be helpful. They could call you. They could call you and say, hey, we got a 911 call. What's going on? And you could say, well, nobody called from here. It must have been one of my daughters, and they could work through it. But that takes more investigation time than most people have in an emergency. So it's not ideal.
That really now kind of worries me, Eric, to be honest with you. One lives in an apartment in Missoula. One lives in a high-rise condominium in Seattle.
Yeah.
So that makes me wonder how that would work in an emergency situation.
Yeah.
That kind of makes me nervous.
Yeah. So my guess, based on my experience, is if either one of them called 911 from their residence, that the cops would probably end up at their building. It's pretty accurate most of the time if you can triangulate from 3 cell phone towers, and cops generally are smart enough to recognize the most likely place where a 911 call is coming from. So I would think that the cops would probably end up at either one of their buildings. And there are more cell phone calls made from apartment buildings like that than there are from houses. So there would be more cell phone traffic. So the cell phone would be more likely to ping there based on triangulation. But then the problem becomes, are there 4 apartments in the building or are there 40, right? And
there's like 10 floors and I don't know, 300 different people living there.
Yeah. So how are we going to get into the building? Are we going to have to get buzzed in?
Right. It is secure. They're both secure.
Right. So how are we going to get into the building? Whose door are we going to start knocking on? Do we know what floor it came from? Is there screaming? Is there gunshots? How do we narrow down where this person is? So
it's complicated and worrisome.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to be the bearer of bad news as far as law enforcement's limitation responding to 911, but that is the truth of it.
Well, knowledge is better than the unknown, because then maybe I can do something different.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you expanding your knowledge to us on that.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Eric.
Of course.
Thank you, Maria. Eric, I am looking forward to a training with judges. I am going to give you kind of a scenario of what we've encountered that we've been dealing with more than the last week, but came to kind of some allegations in the last week for us. We have a domestic violence victim who, the domestic violence, of course, was pretty severe. He was convicted. He is in a secure facility. Our liaison who was assisting her was in court with her for a parenting plan now a year or so down the line. There have been hundreds of things filed with the court from this offender. It is his way to continue to torment the victim now through a parenting plan process. The judge, at a loss of the harassment and the magnitude of things being filed with the court, said, do we have a solution, on where the information can go through so it's not harassing the victim's father. And our liaison, and I believe kind of reluctantly, said, okay, you can have them sent through me, which we've done before in the field, because I have to say, Eric, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I thought it was only for orders of protection. So the information that you're giving is really valuable to an old dog like me. So I felt like when everything started with this program, it was really kind of put out there as an order of protection, or at least I focused on that because that's what I was doing the most at the time that this program was established.
Right.
So this is very helpful because now, instead of me thinking this is specifically for orders of protection, you're saying it is for parenting plans,
Yep.
divorce decrees,
Absolutely.
those type of situations where even if there is a magnitude of legal paperwork that is flying through the court system.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really disappointed that the video I had queued up didn't work today, because we made that video specifically for the court system. And I was using it just as kind of a demonstrator of how the program should be used, but it would be really helpful for this question in particular. Yes, this address can absolutely be used for every type of court filing imaginable if the participant is enrolled in this program. And we do that for this exact reason, right? Because everything that's, well, maybe not everything. I'm not a lawyer. I've never been to court. I'm not the expert here, but largely things that are filed with the court need an address on them, right? And so I get calls all the time from survivors saying, I don't want to put my address on here because I don't want them to have my address, right? And so I say, great, we'll get you enrolled. You can use the substitute address. It's perfect for that. Sometimes the better solution is for them to use their lawyer's address, the law firm's address, if they have a lawyer, but most don't. So that's why it's really helpful that for them to enroll in our program, is so that they can use that. And it should be put on everything. Anything that requires an address, the substitute address should be put on there, because I've had situations before where even one time the residential address was given in one filing and then it ended up on court record. And then the person moved to a different jurisdiction and the case followed her to the different jurisdiction. And now the court in that different jurisdiction has her home address. And she's saying, somebody screwed up. I never gave them their home address. I had to track it all the way back to where she started. Right. And it's out there now. It's on court record, and that's an issue. So it should be used every single time. And as kind of a key piece to the court stuff for everybody to know is that when the applicant enrolls in the address confidentiality program, they give the Attorney General's office, which means me, authorization to act as a receiver for service of process. So that means that if they are served with some type of court document, a summons or a subpoena or a civil complaint or something like that, the court or whoever is providing the service should be serving me in person. I sign for it on their behalf. They come to my office, they serve me, I sign for it. It becomes my responsibility to get it to the survivor. The sheriff's office or a process server should not be knocking on the person's door and serving them with a court document. And any court documents that are issued to the survivor should be coming through the address confidentiality program, whether that's regular mail, a notice of something that's happening, or whether it's certified restricted that requires a signature, doesn't matter. It should be coming to us. It should be coming through us. That is what the program is set up to be used for, is to keep the participant's address out of the court so that they are safe from whoever they're in a court action against.
Wow, that is amazing. And that would help me in a couple cases that I have.
Yep.
So Taylor wondered, is there a link to that video that you can send out after the meeting?
I would love to do that. Yep.
Okay.
These videos are brand new. I've spent the past 2 years working on a grant project to get these videos made. And the grant just finished September 30th. So I just got final approval to use them. This was going to be the first time I debuted this particular video. So I have a link that's working right now from where the production company sent it to me. So I will send that out. You can use it. Hopefully within the next few weeks, they'll actually be posted on our website so that I can just send people to our website to watch them. We have 4 different videos and a separate animated explainer video that just tells the basic function of the program. So hopefully those will be up soon. And we targeted all different audiences with those so that everybody can find a video that teaches them what they should be doing in their profession.
Thank you. That is excellent. And then Heidi Sanders says, just one quick thing about parenting plan paperwork. Family law statutes generally require that parents keep one another and the court updated as to the address at which the children will be living. If a survivor is going to exclude that for safety reasons, they will generally need permission from the court. In the case that I just explained, the court actually put it in a judgment. Stating that all paperwork would go through our liaison, and we will probably have to ask the court to have that changed.
Okay.
So that is Heidi, who is brilliant about DV law and courts, as you're well aware.
Yep. Thank you for that, Heidi. Yeah, court stuff is so complicated, especially family law stuff. And like I said, this program is helpful, but it's not one-stop shop for how to stay safe. And that's why we're so thankful when survivors have an attorney to help them accomplish some of these things. But it's also why I'm doing my best to get this information to the court system. Because the court system is complex, it's intimidating, it's overwhelming, and everybody who has a role in the court system feels pretty comfortable in their role, and they feel like there's a way to do everything. Right, but the court system is just like the rest of state government, where they're required by statute to accept this legal substitute address, and they need to know that, and they need to know how to do it. So I'm really trying very hard to get, especially in front of court clerks, to talk to them about this program and how they can work with participants approaching them for help to use this program. So that'll start with referrals to the program. If the person approaching them for help confides in them that they have a safety issue, the clerk can refer them to the program before they put their home address on any paperwork or anything like that. The clerk can know that they're enrolled in this program and how they can help a participant use this program to navigate the court system and stay safe. And for technicalities like that somebody like me can't advise the participant on, the clerk should know that type of particular piece of information and can help the survivor find a way to reconcile being enrolled in the address confidentiality program and that particular piece of information that they would be required to disclose to the court unless there's some sort of particular order by the judge. So clerks and judges are one particular audience that I really want to get in touch with to talk about this particular program with. I think we have just a little bit of time left, so I'm going to try to kind of speed through a few more important points. It's important to talk about co-applicants. When I enroll a survivor in the program who has family members or that will be living with them, I do my best to enroll the entire household. A lot of participants have kids living with them. Some have a spouse or a partner living with them. Occasionally we have siblings or parents or grandparents living with the survivor. It's important that all of those people enroll together as a household because it's really easy to connect people, right? It's really easy to say this person and this person are married. Why are their addresses different, right? And so if there's a married couple or if there's a kid going to school that gives their home address to the school, but then the parent is giving the substitute address everywhere else, that doesn't reconcile. And there are just lots of ways where the address can get out if it's not used by every single person who lives in the household who's enrolled in the program. So we enroll everybody in the household. We issue ACP authorization cards to everybody in the household, and we encourage them all to use it every single time they have to provide an address to kind of keep a unified front to keep that participant safe. Registering to vote is a complicated situation. It's maybe not one I'll go into a lot of detail with on today's call, but it's another one of those complex issues for participants. Voter registration in Montana is complex because it's done differently by every county. It's run by the counties. And so there are different systems in every county, different people who work in every county, and different levels of knowledge and training in every county. So often participants call me panicked because they feel like they're faced with the choice of registering to vote and giving up their home address, and that causes them to feel unsafe, or they simply don't register to vote and they don't get to exercise their constitutional right, and that makes them mad. And I feel like that is a totally reasonable way to feel. So this is one of those things that does require some level of actual physical location for the person to accomplish. But most often, if I can get involved in the process to help a person register to vote, I can work with the elections administrator at the county level to find a way that makes everybody feel like they got the information they needed and the survivor is safe. Often we can simply enroll them as confidential voters, and that keeps their name off the off the voter registration rolls that can be bought. So oftentimes that's enough of a feeling of safety for the survivors, and if that's good for them, that's good for me. A lot of times when we enroll them, we can use a cross street that's near their house, so it's not their actual residential address, but it's close enough for a ballot to be generated. But it kind of is different at every county level. So I'm working hard to get the elections director at the Secretary of State's office to work with me on issuing some sort of statewide declaration as to how registering to vote will be handled for ACP participants. And I'm also working to get the legislation changed, because there is voter registration legislation as far as confidential voters that allows someone to be enrolled as a confidential voter if they have a safety concern, but only if they display certain types of information like a protection order or an order from a judge. And ACP is not mentioned there. So my pipe dream is to have the ACP authorization card listed right there in the statute along with an order of protection, so that I don't have to call every elections administrator in the state to get them on board with this, so that the person can just show up, hand them their authorization card and say, I need to be registered as a confidential voter, and that will be accomplished.
We hope you're successful, Eric.
Yeah, I think I will be. I think I have the support of elections administrators at the county level. What we find is that most elections administrators recognize that this program and the authorization card kind of matches up with the spirit of the law protecting confidential voters, but not necessarily the letter of the law. And that's where the debate is. You know, do they make that exception and do what they feel like the law is intended to do and provide that safety? Or do they feel like it's their duty to follow the law the way it is absolutely written and they can't do this? So just a simple legislation change would clear that up, I think. I've kind of covered all of this stuff. I've talked a little bit about situations that require a residential address. There are unfortunately some things that a survivor will have to give a residential address for, even if they're enrolled in this program. And at that point, it becomes a conversation of why. Why is the address required? How it will be used? How will it be stored in records? Who has access to those records? Will the information be sold to data aggregators or third-party marketing companies? Will the agency that I'm giving my information to share that with another agency, you know, from court to court or law enforcement agency to court or something like that? Can whatever file my information is going to be kept in, can that be marked confidential? And what does confidential mean in this situation? Does confidential mean that a supervisor can see it, or does confidential mean that everybody with supervisor status can see it? Does that mean that anybody who works in the office can see it? You know, for the example of voter registration, a lot of counties I'll talk to, I'll say, well, if you mark them as a confidential voter, who can see that? And they will say, I can as the elections administrator, or I can and one supervisor can. And it becomes a conversation with the survivor of, is that enough for you? Does that meet your threshold for making you feel safe? And if they say yes, that's great. If they feel like that's too many people who know where they're actually living, well, then we have to go someplace else, right? Another good example is with Social Security disability. We have quite a few participants who are receiving Social Security disability. And as a federal agency, they're not required to accept the substitute address. A handful of months ago, I ended up on a call with a supervisor at a Social Security office here in the state who had never heard of this program before, who was really frustrated with the participant trying to seek services and trying to use her substitute address. And we ended up arguing for probably 20 minutes. But finally, I was able to convince this person, supervisor, that this is a legitimate thing and the person was looking for some safety. And so we were able to talk about solutions, and that was great. So we worked through it, but then it became, yes, we do need her home address, but yes, we can mark the file as confidential. And so my question became, what does that mean? Who has address to that? Who has access to that? And the answer, when I pushed the supervisor on it, was anybody who works for the Social Security Administration has access to that. How many people is that? Is that 1,000 people? Is that 10,000 people? That's not good enough, right? If it was you, one person, maybe that would be okay. But if it's everybody who works for this federal agency, that's not good enough. Just because you won't release the information to the public, that doesn't necessarily make the survivor feel good enough, because everybody who works there can still see that address. So then we had to talk about other solutions, but that was the key question to ask. Is great, you can mark it as confidential. What does that mean? Who can see it? And the answer wasn't satisfactory.
Perfect.
So that's kind of what I have. The wrap up is, when in doubt, give me a call, whether that's one of you interacting with the survivor or the survivor themselves. The phone number's on there. My phone number's here, so is my email. Reach out to me. I'm happy to chat anytime. This is the program I'm passionate about, and I'm happy to answer questions. Even after this call wraps up, if you have a question, feel free to shoot me an email or give me a call.
Eric, I'm going to go ahead and post your phone number in the chat.
Fantastic. One other thing was that Jamie asked me to just make a quick plug for Hope Cards. That's another program that we run here at the Office of Victim Services. And the Hope Cards specifically do have to do with orders of protection. It's a way to make an order of protection easier to reference and easier to enforce for law enforcement. And when Joan back to the group to talk about domestic violence fatality review, she'll talk about Hope Cards too, because that is a program that was born solely out of domestic violence fatality review.
Yes, love that. And you have been amazing, and I am so grateful that we had you today.
Thank you.
Obviously, there was a lot of questions about it, and if there's anything we can help do to continue to promote this, and we will.
Great.
You let us know, and we will assist.
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, anybody you can point my way, feel free to do it. Like I said, I'm happy to have conversations with anybody who has questions, whether that's you or a survivor you're working with or another colleague that you come into contact with. Send them my way, and we'll get everybody on board.
Perfect. I don't know if Tina's still with. I want to also give, before we leave, and once again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Tina, one more time to plug what's going on this afternoon, Tina, if you're still available.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Okay, so this afternoon we're doing a session on missing and murdered Indigenous persons. At 1 o'clock at the Crime Prevention Conference from 1 to 3, we'll be covering a deep dive into 3 years of data analysis on the missing persons clearinghouse list and what the data tells us. It's eye-opening, and I really encourage those of you who work with youth and youth in that are, I guess, in the juvenile justice system to attend, or youth that are in care, because I think the results of our data analysis will surprise you. At 3, we will follow up from 3 to 5 with a community listening session where we will talk about the results that we've gathered from other community listening sessions, ask questions, and get feedback from you guys and the rest of the attendees about what you think are barriers to reporting missing persons, what kind of support services families need and are currently available, which is what we're really most interested in, and things that we can do to support those families. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you, Tina, and thank you again, Eric.
Absolutely.
This was valuable information, very valuable.
Thank you all for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Everybody have a lovely afternoon, and hopefully you join Tina in learning a significant amount of statistics that we didn't have before that will drive this. Tina's position and her office in a direction that I really want to know about. So
Thank you.
All right.
thank
Take
you.
care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.